very warm welcome to everybody here and to the viewers at home as well. Very happy that you're here. We're having a really important evening, I would say, and a very topical evening as well. Peace under Trump, the future of Ukraine, Europe, and maybe NATO. We're discussing the foreign policy of our countries. My name is Yuri Albrecht. I'm the director of the Balie, and I will be leading this conversation tonight. It's almost 3 years that there's a full-scale war going on in Ukraine. There was a war long before that, but it's February will mark the 3-year will be the 3-year mark. Relentless fighting in the east. The Russians seem to have found a way to really exhaust the Ukrainians and gain ground. Is it a shift in this full-scale war? What will Trump's election change in that? Maybe we're going to discuss these sort of things. His re-election, of course, will influence the world. We don't have these round balls to look into the future, but we can try to talk about it. And I'm very, very happy to have an excellent 3 guests tonight from 3 different countries. Louis Vassy, he's no stranger to the Netherlands. He's been the ambassador of France to the Netherlands. And he's just been appointed this autumn as the president of the Sciences Po. I'm very happy that he made it here from Paris. And also Dilan, the leader of the Liberal Party, the VVD in our country, successor of Mark Rutte, a leader in parliament of that party as well. Very warm welcome to you too on a Saturday evening. I'm very happy that you're willing to discuss these important sort of issues. Thank you very much also for coming. And third, but absolutely not last, I'm very, very happy that we are welcoming Lesia Orobets, former member of parliament from the Ukraine. She made a round trip around Europe. She just came in from Britain, where she advised the British Parliament on foreign policy issues. I'm very, very happy that you're here, willing to share your insights and opening the evening. Very welcome, warm welcome to you. You are also currently active in the Safe Sky initiative, trying to build an international support to protect Ukrainian airspace from incoming bombs and airplanes. I'm, as a citizen of Western Europe, really amazed that we didn't already, long time ago, close the airspace over Ukraine, but we will discuss that maybe later on as well. A warm welcome to you too. We do realize that it's very, very difficult to be coming from a country which is daily under attack, so we really appreciate the fact that you're willing to talk to us about those things. It's very hard, I would imagine. So also, thank you very much for coming, and the floor is yours first, and we will discuss with the other panelists later on. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me here. I would like to start with an update on the most recent events in Ukraine, and then we'll move to questions and answers you have on the security matters. Yesterday, the biggest attack on Ukrainian energy system happened. Russia shot over 90 missiles and 200 drones, yet they have a very limited success, as 80 out of 90 missiles were put down by Ukrainian air forces, and 11 of those missiles were destroyed with the help of F-16 jets. Exactly those F-16 jets which were generously given to us by the government of Netherlands. So I do believe that I have to express my deep gratitude for helping us in the time of our greatest need. Hartelijk dank. In order to understand the possible peace scenario, we should first recognize the nature of this war. I was told I can do the presentation. Let's try how it works. Huh? Oh yeah, give me that. Oh yeah, good. So you probably know that those two are already good friends, and since yesterday we have a confirmation that North Korean soldiers are being used on the attacks, and one of the missiles we had yesterday was the North Korean production missile. So what about the nature of this war? Is this the war over territory? Despite popular belief, it is not. Everyone who ever saw the map of Russia would realize how big its territory is and would recognize that the last thing this country needs is another piece of territory. So why would Russia be eager to put down 700,000 soldiers dead or wounded? It is definitely not a territory. This war was from the start the war about the political influence. Russian plans were to insert the pro-Russian government to be able to dictate its will. If you need an example, please look closer to Georgia. In 2003, they had a revolution. They managed to elect the pro-Western government. They quickly held the reforms that changed the old and corrupted state into a beacon of democracy. And they were on their way to the EU and Nato. And guess what? Russia wouldn't let it happen. So in 2008, they invaded Georgia. They occupied 20% of their territory, and they invested heavily to corrupt their political and economic situation. And you know what happened today? The pro-Russian president was elected by parliament, and the best but last standing good people of Georgia came on streets trying for the last time to protect their democracy. This is how things can get badly with or without war, but with Russian influence. In other words, even if Ukrainians would give up their territory, this war would not end. It would just stimulate the appetite of the aggressor to come back for more. And it would encourage the potential aggressor be aware that China is carefully studying the lessons of this war, and they would definitely not repeat the mistake of Russia starting the war unprepared. When Russia failed to achieve its goals in the first months of the war, they changed their way of war efforts, and their goal remained the same: to expose the political control over Ukrainian territory. From the Russian perspective, if Ukraine remains the Western time of democracy with free speech and free elections, freedom of rule of law, but the most important, with strong, effective, secure guarantees and means, that would mean that Russia has lost this war. Second important thing we have to keep in mind is about the nature of this war. The nuclear blackmailing that Russia is using would have a huge aftermath on the geopolitical map of future. This is my personal nightmare, because from those data you would see that Russia is capable of producing 180 missiles per month. Not a single European state would be able to match it with that number of interceptors. So the second important thing you have to know about this war is the terroristic nature of the war efforts that Russia is using against civil population and critical civil infrastructure. At the beginning of this war, we found ourselves in the middle of a missile crisis. Not because we were not prepared, we were heavily prepared, but Russia shot 5,000 missiles at us and the same amount of drones. So our own stocks were almost out, and the US, unfortunately, was too slow to send us anything for substitute. So we ended up in losing, no, not this time, sorry. So we ended up in losing 50% of our generation capacity. So once we were the country that exported energy, and now we are heavily dependent on import of energy to keep the light on in our houses. So what Russia is trying to achieve is to freeze out our cities. It takes just 3 days without electricity, with the temperature below zero, to freeze out the house. And they are trying to get us without heat, without electricity, without water, without internet connection, without mobile connection. So another thing that they want to do is to start to get the collapse of the economy and to yet another wave of immigrants and refugees. And if you would ask me about the number of those refugees, I would ask you to calculate each Ukrainian child still in Ukrainian territory, multiply it by 2, so at least one parent, and that would be the number, because no one in its senses would keep a child in a frozen house. Why? Why Russia is doing that? Welcome to Russian style of negotiations. Russia is the country that took terrorism to its perfection. Not only they finance and support an armed terroristic group all over the planet, they themselves, knowing how sensitive Western public is to suffering of civilians, would keep the whole Ukraine hostage to squeeze the peace deal they need. But Ukrainians have learned the lessons. When we decide to stand up and fight, we die in thousands. But when we decide to give up, we are killed in millions. As you might know, last year, the Parliament of Netherlands recognized the Holodomor as the genocide against Ukrainians. We lost over 5 million people in artificially created hunger organized by Stalin and communists. So yes, we've learned our lesson in a very hard way. I could say that this is a very personal thing to me as well, because my grandmother, Maria, was one of the Holodomor survivors. Her very first memory would be walking around on the streets and begging for bread. So yes, we've learned that lesson, and this is a lesson I want to share with you. You'd rather fight Russia than give up and negotiate on their conditions. Now, when we better understand the nature of this war, let's talk about how the peace can look like for Ukraine, for Europe, and for NATO. Trump promised to finish this war in 24 hours, but what kind of a means does he have? Actually, he has the same instruments that Biden had. So what's new he can bring to the table? Unfortunately, with Trump, we have more questions than answers. Would Putin be able to impose the peace deal that looked nice, but with the devil in details? Is Europe actually ready to protect itself if US withholds? And what would it take to be fully prepared? Will the instability in Ukraine and its failure to protect its territory and people cause the weakening of the whole Europe? Are Western democracies strong enough to protect themselves from the covert hostilities of the autocracies? Let's try and find some answers. First, poisonous pill of negotiation. I strongly believe that Russia would escalate their war efforts to the maximum to force a peace deal. They insist on lifting up sanctions and get access to Western capital markets. Why? Because despite the popular belief that they have the unlimited resources, they have a huge war debt. And they would use any pause to rearm and refinance so that they could become invincible. Please do not make the mistake thinking that Russian army is weaker than they were at the beginning of war. Quite the opposite. They are much stronger. They've learned the lesson. They know how to deal with Western weapons. Russians would probably pretend to negotiate rather than negotiate for real, as long as they can. Why? To cool down the eagerness of our partner to help us. So why would you send your help if the war is almost over? Exactly, yeah? Beware of Russians, as they would get back the access to your capital and your technologies. Let me show you something. Okay, I'm sorry. Please. No. Yay, thank you. Okay, take a closer look. Those are the missiles Russia heavily uses and used against us yesterday. And those are the number of foreign-produced components used in that missiles. So my question is Western civilization protected enough so why autocracies can steal your technologies and can steal your spare parts and use it against you or those governments that you are trying to protect? Actually, Russians are very good in stealing. I'm the first time in Amsterdam, but I know that Tsar Peter, Russian emperor, was copying Amsterdam and built St. Petersburg. He failed. I mean, it's not that joyful, not that fun, but still. They stole even your cheese recipe. They copied the way how you do fleet, and you probably not know, but they actually tried to steal your flag. Russian flag is just the other sequence of color. They are very good at stealing. I would very much want to warn you not to lift sanctions, because with that, they would be able to continue stealing to the extent when those autocracies become invincible. Second, what are the real guarantees to end this war for good? The only good guarantees is to actually make Russia small again. Those are the maps of real attacks. If you probably remember, the left one is the attack of a children's hospital. So you can see the complexity of those attacks. Both used drones and missiles. Unfortunately, Patriots and other interceptors do not work on themselves. They need people, highly trained people. So when we are talking about guarantees, we would very much want not just boots on the ground or any papers signed, because Russia do not keep the agreements that they sign, but we would very much want to have a safe sky. And we're not the beggars here. What we can put to the table is that we know how to catch those attacks. I mean, we are able to catch up to 80% of the missiles, and we would be eager to train your soldiers and officers doing that. Because if this is the tomorrow, we'd rather be prepared. I know a very good Dutch proverb, sorry if I pronounce that not correctly, and gewaarschuwd mens telt voor twee, meaning that forewarned means forearmed. So this is something that we can put on the table while negotiating the peace deal. One more thing. Okay. Yeah. You remember the COVID times. You remember 2 years kids not going to school. We have 5 years of kids not going to school. And this is our tomorrows. And we want very much to have it stop. So if Russia would make this winter about freezing us out and blackouts and cold, please do not get yourself squeezed to the peace deal that would never last. Don't let Russia buy the time to rearm and start over us again. On the contrary, please, one more. Yeah, it works, good. Please make everything possible to help us to stand up. We're not beggars here. We are a very good investment. Investing in Ukrainian security would help you a lot to invest in the security of the Europe. This is the map of the critical infrastructure. You see atomic stations. You know what? Russians are already hitting those atomic stations. So if something happens, the wind could blow in any direction, and they do not care, but we care. As long as we stay united, and this is the main message of me today, as long as we stay united, as long as we unite our efforts and do not allow Russians or other autocracy politicians to stay in between, we are able to win. This war is winnable, and Russia would lose. But this is something that we have to keep in mind. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm sure there will be a time for questions after the speeches of all of us, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Lesia Orobets. You will be back on the table, and indeed there's ample time at the end, of course, of the audience to come in, as always. We're lucky enough to have two musicians here for two intermezzi. Katja Derven on cello and Josef Lendwey on violin. Warm welcome to you too. You're playing several pieces, but you will explain to us what you are going to play for us. Warm welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting us, and it's a big thing to play here. I'm Ukrainian, Chile, living in Holland, like long time already. I'm performing. Music is international language, and we try to help with what we can to survive and to help Ukrainians and all of us. Thank you, Lesia, for your nice speech. The first piece was Bach. You don't have to explain Bach. It's like when you play Bach, it's like you talk to God. It was first invention from his great, I think, 24 inventions. And now we're going to play one Ukrainian song, Чорнобривці посіяла мати, the marigold. It's about a flower. It became kind of symbol of Ukrainian mothers and Ukrainian women, girls, who waiting for their dearest man from a war. We made with Joseph, my great friend and colleague, we made, after the war started 1 year later, the 24th of February, we made video and our arrangement for violin and cello. And every year when war, again, is a horrible anniversary, we put it on YouTube and put it again on Facebook, Insta, and just to remember people, to remember people. So I hope you enjoy. Now we will play a very famous piece of Johannes Brahms, Hungarian Dance, number 5. Josef is a big Hungarian violinist, and this piece gives hope. We can play any time for any location. So we decide to also give hope, because without art, we cannot survive.
Yes, thank you very much for this intermezzo Brahms, and for me a very unpronounceable but very impressive Ukrainian componist, Chornobrivitsky. Remembering fallen people. Thank you very much. We'll be back for a second intermezzo, but first I'd like to invite Dilan, Yeşilgöz, and Louis Vassy here and there to the table. Welcome both again. Wonderful you're here. Louis, may I start with the French perspective? You're the guest here, we're the Dutchman. Maybe just to start off, I don't think I haven't mentioned that over the past over 2 years you've been chef de cabinet of the French foreign minister, 2 French foreign ministers actually, and in an interesting period, of course, in which the foreign policy of France actually, I would say, as an observer, changed, I would say, to much more pro-European than it maybe used to be for a while. Is that fair to say?
First of all, I'm glad to be here in Amsterdam after
Wonderful you're here.
a few years back in Paris. It's a great pleasure to be able to be here, specifically at the Balie, where I have really fond memories, and also to be with Dilan Yeşilgöz that I meet again. Look, I don't know if French foreign policy has been more pro-European. I would argue it's been so for quite a while, and I will try to overcome the traditional French modesty to maybe underline a couple of issues where we might feel a little bit validated in our analysis if you look at the state of the world right now. I think it's fair to say that we have always argued, I mean, it's been a trend of foreign policy for a really long time to argue against blocs politics and the difficulties related to an approach where Europe would simply define itself in relation to its belonging to one bloc specifically. Notwithstanding, obviously, transatlantic solidarity, I guess it's fair to say that we have tried to have a more original voice within the European concert over the last few decades. I think it's also fair to say that we've alerted or warned against too much commercial dependence towards China specifically, that we've warned maybe against too much energy dependence towards Russia, and that we've warned against too much security dependence towards the United States. I don't want to say that the last few years have proven us true, but I guess it's right in a way.
Proving you right, you mean? Yes,
right.
Yes, you've been warning for those dangers.
I think the exact expression we used to use was we don't want every 4 years to be dependent on the choice of people in Missouri for our own destiny. And with all due respect for people in Missouri, we still want to be able to define our own course. So yes, we've been pushing that agenda for a while. What is true is that certainly because of the fact that the US basically has been going through a kind of isolationist trend, which is not specific to Trump, I would argue, because you also had Bernie Sanders very strong in the last electoral cycle in the previous ones. So you have this very deep trend in the US that we need to acknowledge. And of course, we have the huge shock of the war in Ukraine and its consequences on our security, where I guess we all understand that we cannot, for security reasons and even for selfish reasons, we cannot accept Ukraine to fail or to fall. And saying that, if you're not completely sure of the level of US commitment, that basically means that you will need to do more as Europeans. So we've been pushing that agenda all over the board, of course, for defense, but also for economic issues. We need to be more competitive. We need to be, we need to have cheaper energy. We need to be more assertive also, and we need also to think the world as it is. Which means maybe coming out of this phase of happy globalization, in which basically the European Union was the embodiment of that moment. You know, we regulate and we don't have enemies. We don't basically use the word enemy anymore, by the way. We have adversaries or competitors, but there are other people out there that think that we are their enemies. So in a way, we need to really come out of all that period of time, not to say that we need to renounce the overall project that we've built around democracy and values, but understand that it will thrive only if we are strong enough. So that would be, I think, the case we've been making, and then, of course, there are very practical consequences to that, but the overall vision, I guess, is that one.
So that's a very eloquent and elaborate way to say, yes, we've been focusing more on the European partners for many different reasons and good reasons, if you describe them. But So there's there's many aspects to that. Of course, we've just been listening to an introduction, and it struck me that you used the word "we cannot allow Ukraine to not to prevail," or words to that extent. That's very interesting. Why not? It's a far-off place we know nothing about, Chamberlain used to say about Czechoslovakia, which is much closer to us.
Ukraine is much bigger, and I think we already tried, let's say, smaller countries failing to an autocratic aggressor. So I think
like Georgia, like we just heard,
the historical record speaks for supporting Ukraine. That goes without saying. But I'm talking really like very basic, even selfish, immediate interests, like control of the agricultural economic sector, control of the energy sector and the energy routes, also the ability to deploy weapon systems even nearer to our borders. And frankly, also the overall fact that if you let the aggression work, of course, has been very, as has been very eloquently said, you simply call for new aggressions next time. So I would argue that it's within reach to get to the point where we have Ukrainians prevailing. I guess Russia is not going through such a great time right now, as we've seen in Syria, the weakening of Iran, its ability to connect to the African and Libyan theaters is also at stake.
Because of the things happening in Syria, you mean? Because the Russian bases
things
in
happening
Syria.
to Syria, because of the situation. I agree with what has been said on the strengthening of the Russia military, but then wars are also won historically by the biggest economy. In the end, I guess the Russian economy is not doing so well, contrary to what the macroeconomic figures show sometimes. As has been said, there is a debt that is growing. The financial situation is not so big. The capacity of productions have increased, but they are not going to increase indefinitely. And we see signs of weakness. I mean, at some point, if you need to call your North Korean buddy to the fight, it's maybe also it shows that you are not in such a great situation. So I would argue that if the Europeans put in the right level of effort, with of course US support, we can get to a situation where the overall strategic situation of Europe is preserved. Of course, we have not been doing enough in the last 2 years. That's also true. No, because it's not only a question of what we provide to Ukraine, because as we know, our production capacities are unfortunately limited. But we should have tried more to increase these capacities and develop the industrial base in Europe when it comes to defense. It has improved, but I guess we are not there yet. At the same time, again, I don't think the Russians are in such a great spot.
Just to understand, and you probably know more than we, the audience, and me myself. We're not there yet in capacity. Is that? Are we nearly there? Are we no way there in Europe to provide that sort of ammunition or military hardware or gear to, or is that just, still very far off, or are we almost there?
No, I think we could get there. I mean, it's really number of shells produced, and I mean these very basic metrics. And the industrial base in Europe is simply big enough, let's say, to develop that, and we have the capacities and the technology, and it's really a question of getting the sense of urgency that is appropriate to simply do more. But I wouldn't say we are that far away.
That's reassuring, I would say. Dilan, Yeşilgöz, we've been seeing, of course, that Prime Minister Rutte and the governments he's been leading in the past years have been a strong advocate of a sort of an international liberal order, strong advocate of defending Ukraine. I would say that probably because the Dutch and Danish efforts, there are now F-16s defending the recent bombardment. The yesterday bombardment was partly put off by F-16s, if I read the communications of President Zelensky. Would you agree that that we need Ukraine to prevail?
Definitely, and the question would be, what's the definition of that? Is that Ukraine
that's
winning, or is it Russia losing? Or is that the same thing? And I remember us talking about this issue in the first months of the war. We are in the third year now, and I think that Putin was expecting to be a 3-day war. And I think the strong will of the Ukrainian people has all struggles, you know, I have so much respect for the Ukrainian people to keep resisting, to keep fighting, and I wonder whether, I wonder if every European country would have stayed so long resistant. So I think it's very impressive to see. And I remember us talking about this issue also in Parliament in all the different places. What does this mean? Does it mean that Russia needs to lose or Ukraine needs to win? Or what's
is that the same thing in your...
I'm not sure. I'm still not sure. I don't have the answer to that. I think exactly like Louis just mentioned, there is so much interconnected in this whole. If Ukraine would not prevail, if Russia would win, then it would mean so much for the world order also afterwards. So China is looking at this war. China is looking at us, how we as Europeans, as Westerns, are standing up, and if we can finish this, yes or no. They're looking at Taiwan. They are thinking about their own agenda, let's say it like that. And then you have the whole other arena Louis was mentioning about Iran and what's happening right now in Syria, and everything is interconnected. And I think this is happening also in a time that in Europe, and also different places in the world, but in Europe, the radicals, the radical right, but also radical left is coming up, is rising. And they have a whole different agenda. They have that false perspective of, you know, saying the Dutch people first, and we're looking at our own country, and ignoring the fact that we are all connected. And what happens in Ukraine is directly impacting us right now, and could even impact us way more. So if you are going to put your own people first, let's go with that dialogue, then still you need to support, in this case, Ukraine and other countries who are trying to stay independent and a strong democracy. So, and I think we came to a point that in politics, if you look at the Netherlands and in Europe, the movements that are winning right now are going into the other direction.
In the other direction of, you mean the more nationalistic?
Yes, the more nationalistic and that
less
false,
internationalistic, isolationist.
Yes, exactly, and the false idea that would be something, you know, benefiting your own
population.
Yes, which is obviously not the case. So for us as a VVD, but as a government right now, it's very important to stay focused, to know that this war, we are interconnected. It is also our war, and we are contributing in hopefully a good manner to support the Ukrainian people. But I agree with Louis. I think we should have done more, and we can do more. If you look at only the sanctions, so you mentioned it earlier, Lesia, I think that in Europe, also in the Netherlands, every day we find out that there are so many ways to ignore the sanctions. And Russia is still earning good money from Europe also, because we are also very depending on them. I think at one point I thought during Corona that Corona shook us awake. You know, it was because we needed China for everything. We needed other different areas of the world and countries to make sure that we would be safe. So that was I thought, a turning point. And then, of course, this war happened and the interconnection we see here. So I think that I'm not sure still which is what we are aiming at, Russia not to win or Ukraine to win, or is there a difference or not? But I am convinced this is all interconnected and we are a huge part of this.
And you would say we should have been doing more over the past 3 years as Europeans or as Dutch or as French?
Well, I think that we are losing, we were way too naive for years, way too naive.
In what respect, would you say?
Well, being so depending on different authorities, different countries, regimes that we shouldn't be depending on, like Russia for our gas, for electricity, for everything. If you look at the dependence we have on China, everything we use right now, as we speak, is probably in one way or another made in China, connected in China. If you look at everything in our society, I think just imagine that here the electricity, the Wi-Fi, everything would go down. How many days could we survive? Lesia was saying, we're preparing for a Cold War, and we know that it might be, these are the ways of attacking us. The Dutch society is so depending on the technology we have. I don't know how many households could survive longer than a few days without, electricity and water and Wi-Fi. What would we do?
Because your predecessor...
And just don't mention the oat milk. We wouldn't have oat milk. This is our society, we are too naive.
That would be a real bummer for Amsterdam public. But your predecessor, Mark Rutte, just the other day said, we have to prepare for war and we need to get a war mentality.
Yeah.
That's what he said. Would you agree to this Secretary General of the NATO, or he's been lambasted for warmongering, of course, immediately after it?
Generally speaking, I think you should always be prepared for any situation, and specifically war. I come from a country that never really believed too much in the dividends of peace and the fact that you could decrease, for example, defense budgets too much, and we've maintained over the years some kind of defense effort, even though, as we see now, not necessarily enough, even in France. I guess so I think it's a fair assessment in itself. Simply what I would argue to make it more global in a way is that we really need to understand even a little bit more, go even a bit deeper in the understanding of the situation in which we are right now. So maybe we are in a pre-war situation, maybe not. We don't really know. Of course, you always need to be prepared. In fact, I would argue we don't really know in which moment we are living right now. There are periods of time in which mankind has been able to say from the beginning where they were. If you look at the Cold War, for example, interestingly, the world's Cold War have been drafted in October 1945, as you know, in an article from George Orwell.
And used by Winston Churchill a little bit later.
And used a few weeks later by a couple of others. But so from the beginning, people knew that they were in this era completely structured around nuclear weapons and their effects on international relations. We knew, I think, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, that we were in a new period of time because of the fall of the Soviet Union. So some have argued the end of history. Others have thought that it was a moment for happy globalization, and democracy was progressing, and things would go better and better. We know that period of time is over. Is it 2001? Is it 2000 with, of course, the attacks on New York? Or is it 2008 with the financial crisis in Georgia that's been mentioned? Or is it 2014 with the Islamic State and the invasion of Crimea? We don't know, but somewhere between 2001 and 2014, we've been entering a new period of time that we don't know how to name. We don't know which moment we are living in, and I think that's a very disturbing situation.
Is that important?
That's very important because we don't know how to address the challenges that come with that moment and the risk. You know, there is this saying, you always prepare for the previous war, and of course the moment but you also prepare yourself for the previous peacetime in a way. So we might be operating under concepts that are not necessarily the right ones. I would argue that our energy policy is not completely sound. I mean, there are many things in which maybe we could do things better, and maybe that has also that's one of the reasons why populist movements are on the rise. I would argue that we need to be more systematic on the way we look at things. We need to policy challenges and the way we run our countries. As has been said, we cannot ignore the world, but we have this pressure to isolate ourselves from the world. So how do we bring about a connection between what we do internally and the challenges of the outside, just to be more efficient, and that has effects, I think, on the way you work on energy transitions and climate change and environment, and understand that you need to carry out these policies, but you need to do that in a way that preserves your competitiveness and your ability to be a strong actor on the international stage. I mean, basically looking into how much issues are intertwined. We are getting there, I guess, in terms at least of thinking at the European level, and our two commissioners, the French and the Dutch one, are actually working together tightly because they are in the same group of commissioners around Stéphane Séjourné, and the fact that we put all these issues pertaining to growth, competitivity, defense industry together shows, I think, a first sign of our willingness to look into these issues, including transitions, in a more global way, and hopefully in a more efficient way at the European level. So, in the end, it's mostly a question of efficiency for all of us if we want to be to appeal to people that are wary of the course of our countries.
Of our countries, yes, because those people vote as well, of course. And if we looking at peace in the East, or winning a war in the East, or both, we have in France, as in Holland, we have, of course, the possibility of Le Pen winning the next elections, and 2027. Are you worried that those parties, and I'm going to ask, of course, the same about Geert Wilders, our parties, we have the same sort of parties in Holland, that they would be less willing to defend the European values and the liberal democracies we have, that they would be more aligned with Putin's foreign policy?
Interestingly, I would say we've been seeing very conservative right-wing movements moving, depending on the countries, though, moving somehow towards the European Union.
You think of Italy, maybe? Or?
Italy, maybe others, and certainly the discourse, including in France, for example, around Brexit or this kind of options, is extremely marginal, if not almost absent. It's a bit early to say what the effect would be, because you have a scenario where simply Europe has become so much a part of our functioning, in a sense, that it absorbs, let's say, these political trends within it. I think it's a very real possibility right now. I don't know, to be completely honest. I think in the end, I remember I have to say, a very interesting study from the institute in The Hague, Klingendale, about people's perspectives on the nation state, let's say, arguing, if I take very raw numbers, that you have 5% of people that are basically define the inside as very ethno-centered, let's say. 15% that are pretty much open border, and 80% that think that there is an inside and an outside, but don't really know how to define it. I guess there is a course, there is a possibility that within this 80%, a majority thinks that belonging to the European Union is also a way of defining the inside and the outside in a way, and in that case, you have in fact possibly a majority, even within parties that are very much to the right. You end up with a majority of people that, in the end, are not willing to abandon the very real benefits that they see from the European integration. Maybe it's too optimistic, but
that would
I think that's a scenario.
Maybe be true for voters for Le Pen or Geert Wilders as well, because if we look at this cabinet, of course, which you're not a part of, but your party is, it struck me that if you look at the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Defense, Casper Veldkamp and Ruben Brekelmans, they seem to be really much in line with the last VVD-led Rutte governments.
Definitely.
Which is surprising in a way, because Geert Wilders had totally different opinions on our foreign policy and where our alliance should be.
You know, Yuri, if this coalition would have decided that there was no support possible for Ukraine, VVD would not be a part of it.
Would that have been?
Definitely not. No, so this was not something we were prepared to negotiate about.
Not even negotiate?
No. No, we are supporting Ukraine. We are supporting our own international security. And that was very clear from the beginning. So obviously it's very important now for our ministers to also, and they did it immediately in their first week. They went to Ukraine, they went to the international...
Yeah, visited Kiev.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And the same counts also for the Prime Minister. It was a very important thing for the VVD, amongst a few other topics. We are going to keep supporting Ukraine. So I can imagine that if you know the history of these parties that you would say this or ask this question, but for me it was very clear, and a few other topics as I mentioned, but the VVD wouldn't have been a part of this coalition. There was no way that the Netherlands would withdraw and leave Ukraine and our allies to their own. That's not what the Netherlands is about. That's not what we have built together. You know, as the Netherlands, we know what it's like to be invaded, to lose your autonomy, to end up in a war. We remember, we know, and this is something we feel very strongly about. And I think what's happening also, and I was a little bit afraid that if you look at the past 3 years, at the beginning, the Dutch public was very loud, we are supporting Ukraine. And I remember us discussing also, at what point would that tip? You know, at what point, because we see also our energy prices rising, we also see the discomfort we live through. Nothing to compare, of course, with living in a real war, but is it close enough to keep involved? To remain involved for the Dutch public. And I am truly proud to see that the Dutch public, 3 years afterwards, still is supporting our stand in this issue, in this matter, because they know, they feel at least what it might mean if Putin wins. I think that is the focus of the Dutch public rather more than if Ukraine would lose, I think. I'm not sure. I think that there's a difference how the Dutch public looks at it. But either way, they support what we are doing right now. And the thing about the radical left or right is also that they are populists. So if the Dutch public would say, we need Putin not to win, then that might also mean that the populist parties would listen to that. So there's something going on there. I'm not quite sure what it is. But I am happy to see that our government is not only keeps supporting this cause, but also remains to play a leading role. And I think that is very important. And on the other hand, what you see in Europe, as Louis also mentioned, is we need to be united. And we see now how difficult that is. At the beginning of the war, we acted very quickly, very quickly. I think we were all surprised by how quickly we could act when really needed. But now, if you're looking at, if you want to be as independent as possible for your energy, then it's crucial that we work together, because as being the Netherlands on our own, we can never have that position again without gas. So we need to work together when it comes to nuclear and all those topics we've been talking about for years. If it comes to our defense, investing in defense is crucial, but also in the industry to make sure that we have the proper instruments. That's something, as Netherlands on our own, we can never achieve. So we need to work together. And I think that Europe is getting there, but we are not there yet, because we have so many differences also within the Union, which is not working very well for us right now. So we need strong leaders who can stand up and who can say we need our own independence and we need to invest in our own autonomy as the European Union, as the member states, and not, weak leaders looking at those autocrats. And I think that's going to be the distinction we're going to make in the coming years when all these parties are rising and rising. I think we need true, strong leaders who are prepared to stand for our national and international security, rather than the weak ones who are looking up to people like Putin.
Yeah, we do have some strong leaders, like at least they're perceived as strong leaders, and you probably mean exactly the opposite. I'm already in the Union. We have Orban. We have maybe we might have Le Pen very, very quickly. And aren't you afraid that if we at every election,
I wouldn't define them as strong leaders.
No.
Okay.
Why not?
Just to make sure.
Why not?
Well,
you pointed that out a little bit, but why not?
Yeah, but if you're looking up to autocrats who are against democracies, against the rule of law, against the freedom of the people, in my book, then you are a weak leader trying to suppress people.
Yeah.
That's for me very clear. So that's not something we are obviously not aiming at, but I know that they're perceived as being strong. But in my world, it doesn't mean strength if you just shout hard enough and suppress people. That's weakness. Wouldn't you agree, Louis?
You look like you want.
No, absolutely not necessarily, but I obviously agree. I think the challenge we have to face, really in a nutshell, is this disalignment between democratic and autocratic regimes, which is that democracy is more efficient in the long run. I think we can. There is a strong case to be made because it's more open, more creative, freer, and so obviously integrates better new ideas and developments and innovation and growth and competitiveness also. Also because your rights are protected, including property rights and other things that will stimulate your country. But of course, it can be less effective on the very short run because it deliberates, it discusses, it takes time to take a decision, etc. And so the argument, of course, the autocrats can only survive on the long run if there is no democracy. So that's the way I read 1984, for example. Everyone reads, I guess, around the police state, which is, of course, one thing you can look at.
George Orwell's 1984,
But also, there is another way of looking at it, is that you have only 3 states, and they are all autocratic. And because they don't need to compete anymore with a democracy, they are less and less effective. And if you follow the book, the living standards of the characters, in fact, decrease. They are low and they decrease during the book. There is less coffee, less sugar, etc. Why? Because you don't really need to be efficient if you don't have, if you are not in competition with an open society. So the challenge for us is to make sure that this inefficiency on the short run is really limited to the minimum, of course, that preserves our deliberating and the values we uphold, And that brings me back to the way that we need to understand well the challenges we are faced with, and the way they interact one with the other. So being strong is being strategic, and I think it's much more difficult to lead a democratic state in a way than and you need stronger leaders.
We are going to listen to a little bit more music, but just a last question maybe here. We've dealt with our internal things, and we're going to talk also about Trump and what it means for Ukraine to prevail, and asking the speaker to come in after the music. But maybe a last, would this be the right moment to get the Brits back in?
I think that our French guest should go first.
But first of all, Brexit was a disaster. There was just one little benefit to Brexit, which is that, and I can say it because it's in the open doctrine and documents from the Dutch state. It's also one of the reasons why the relationship between the Netherlands and France improved.
Would you say so? Yeah.
I think it's been stated publicly that with Brexit, obviously there was.
It's official.
It's official. Okay. So I'm just quoting the like official documents by the Dutch government. In a way, obviously there was a need to look into other playing partners within the European Union, and then there is also the fact, I guess, that the overall course of Europe and the international stage has made it has increased the number of issues on which we agree. Obviously, we need to have the UK very much attached to the European security and nearly pegged to us, in a way. At the same time, it's really for the Brits to decide the course of their evolution on that issue, and
yeah,
I don't expect that it would take less than a generation to really move back from such a strategic and heavy decision. The other small benefit, of course, is that it has killed the exit agenda in all other European countries, because if you look at the results, it's, you can argue that you don't want to really do the same.
Yeah, but that we have already that benefit, and now get them back in. And that, in my opinion, at least, I think a lot of Dutch would think it might be the French who object to this.
No. No.
I think that
it's a real heavy misconception. If you look at it from the French perspective, we lost with the UK, the only other nuclear power in the EU, the other country that was looking at the world the same way we did in global terms, the other military that was ready to physically intervene in wars or crisis. So I would absolutely argue that we were amongst the ones that lost most with Brexit. So, and by the way, we are a bordering country, so it's a real mess to handle. So there was no choice in France at the moment of Brexit.
Okay. Dilan, Yeşilgöz?
Yeah, I think that
the right moment.
I don't think I was in London last week talking to officials actually and people in politics, and this came up in every conversation.
Oh, really?
Also, yes. Mm-hmm. And they said actually the same thing as Louis just mentioned. It might take a generation because it was such a huge step, of course.
Were you talking on both sides of the aisle?
Yeah. And but
so Labour and Conservatives.
Yes. And what they also mentioned was, that might be a huge step right now. So we will need a few years to get back into that conversation if we would ever get there. But there's of course a huge grey area, and I think that when Brexit happened, different countries, also the Netherlands, we all said, you wanted this, then you deal with it.
Yeah, you eat it. Yeah, you ordered it, you eat it.
Yes, and it was also because in different countries, also in the Netherlands, Nexit was also a topic. So exactly like Louis mentioned, I think that everybody was also a little bit afraid, is this going to be one step and are others going to follow? And now we know that's not an option anymore. So I think that the rest of Europe is calmer. And I think that the UK is well, looking at their own strategic steps, was this the best thing to do? And now there's a gray area where we can work much more together. We are not using that gray area right now. So we can fill that gap. We have to fill that gap because, union or not, we are neighbors, we are like-minded, we are allies. So I think that our responsibility now is fill the gap, and then the next generation might start a new referendum. Or not.
Okay, those things can unravel very, very quickly, as you've just seen in Syria this week. But anyhow, things could become much more quicker than you think, not generations. Last question, because I remember the interview of Macron earlier this year with The Economist. I think it was a great stunt by The Economist to do that, and there he sort of offers the force de frappe, the French nuclear weapons, to sort of be shared with the Union. Would you still think that's, because you mentioned the only other European nuclear power, and this is earlier this year, that might be, I mean, that's a long time in politics, of course, but...
Look, I won't enter into commenting French nuclear doctrine here right now, because it would be a whole conference to be held. But I don't think think it's a completely new concept for the French, the relationship between our deterrent and the overall European security. It's been a while that, the way it works is that our nuclear doctrine is set in presidential speech every 5 to 10, 15 years. It's been a while now that there is a mention that obviously there is a link between our vital interests and European security, which is kind of obvious in a way. And there's been a proposition, and I think Macron reiterates it in the interview made at the very beginning of 2019, in the last speech of Macron on nuclear issues, to have that discussion with European allies. But that was like January or February 19, and then 20, sorry, and then COVID came,
COVID happened,
and I think we all were taken up by other challenges. But yes, we've been, I mean, our leadership in France has been for a while saying that it's a question. Of course, it's not a question of sharing nuclear deterrent, because it's simply not possible. But it's how do we integrate that reality of the existence of French deterrence within European security, let's say, and of course there's a Nato aspect to it, and many other questions to be raised. But it's there.
Well, maybe again reassuring. I would like to invite the two musicians we have been listening to, Joseph Lendvé and Katja Dirven, to come again, and we're listening to a short while to some music, and then we continue the conversation with the three of you.
Thank you very much. It was again music of Bach. It's amazing to play this music and also bring to you. It was invention in A-moll, played by all great musicians in the world. We continue with very popular piece from Vittorio or Vitalio Monti. It's Czardash, very famous from Joseph's country, but written by Italian composer. So it's about cooperation in Europe in art, like in music. And we made our arrangement because this piece is written for violin and orchestra. And we made our arrangement together, and then we put all great music actually from all Europe, including some Ukrainians. Enjoy. last but not least is other Hungarian dance of Brahms. He wrote 21. It's number 4, and it's in minor, and there is one Ukrainian song in it.
Thank you very much for those 3 wonderful pieces. Lesia Orobets, can I ask you to join us for the second part of our conversation after your speech? Maybe, and yes, this might be the moment we're bringing in Trump into conversation, or peace, or how that would look, or what's necessary for that. If I start off, if I may, with you to that question. What would, in your mind, be? We've been using this phrase, Ukraine to prevail, which is a nice way of putting it in many ways, but also it's not very sure what prevailing would mean. What, for you, what would mean prevailing? Would that just...
Oh, good question. First of all, Ukraine being a member of NATO. Second, NATO still exists. You know, because if you think of NATO as a big insurance company, what would happen to insurance company when the biggest stakeholder withdraws?
Yeah.
So second part of it, NATO still exists, and NATO is a kind of a club when not only you get help when attacked, but you also have to provide help if someone else is attacked. So Putin knows his drills how to divide people and nations, and that would be the questions what you are willing to fight for. Is some distant, I don't know, Laplandia in Finland worth going to war? Would Estonia Estonian power plant attacked by drones be good enough to go for war? Would 2 farmers in Poland, which happened a year ago, died because of Russian missile be good enough to go at war? So those are the questions that should actually be answered for the situation where Ukraine prevails, and not just Ukraine, but Europe prevails. Whether Trump would lead this way and whether he is the leader up to the task, only the history would show, because what I've noticed so far is that history plays very weird games. Sometimes it makes leaders of those who were the least prepared. I mean, I've survived through, I participated myself in 2 revolutions, and as a kid I observed the 3rd one. So sometimes revolutions make great leaders of people who were never known before. And there's a trend in Europe, the bigger the country, the lesser the leaders, with very few exceptions. So I don't know how come it happens, but this is something that should be also seen too, because Trump was previously known as the populist, someone who would seek popular attention. And fighting with Russia and other autocracies like China would mean to pay a huge price, not only on the gas stations, but on the people toll. So whether he's prepared to make his people pay that price, that's what history would show us. But, you know, we can pray.
So you would say Ukraine member of the NATO is still existing, and would you also say Ukraine in its integrity in the borders from 2014?
Once again, this is not the war over the territory. Those territories are occupied by people. So when we are trying to fight our cities back, and when we actually manage to liberate them, we find empty prisons full of blood.
Yeah.
We find hospitals where they have stolen not just the equipment, but the beds. You know, we find museums empty, but what is the most horrific thing, we find families with no kids, kids stolen. So when we are trying to restore our integrity, it's not just about the line on the map. We're trying to get our people back in safety.
Yeah.
So that it is.
Mm-hmm. Dilan, would you think that that there might be in the next years a possibility to find some way to end the war?
Well, I hope so, but I think that we should follow the lead of Ukraine. Ukraine decides what the end of that war, if it's up there, what it means. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that it's up to the US or to Europe to design the end. In the best way, we can do it together, but Ukraine is leading, as we have said, I think, for the past years. And I think that's very crucial, because if you're going to ask a country to, you know, nobody wants war. I think that's, for me, mind-blowing, the discussion you sometimes hear also in the Netherlands. Why are you supporting Ukraine? Support peace. Well, that's what we're trying to do. But Ukraine decides on designing what the peace means, I think. So I hope there's a way out. I hope there will be an end to this war for everybody involved, all the innocent people involved. But that's up to Ukraine and up to us to make sure that we keep supporting Ukraine in that way.
Mm-hmm. And if you look to the election of Donald Trump, he said, you know, he would try to, actually, he didn't even use the word try, he would end the war very, very soon. What would that, I think he said something within a day or something, but anyway.
24 hours.
Yeah.
He said 24 hours,
yeah.
And I think nobody knows exactly what that means. If that would mean, you know, there are different scenarios thinkable, but probably it will be a scenario which I'm not thinking of right now. Mm-hmm. But there's also talks about some kind of a peace truce. That's not an ending of the war, but that's a truce for now. And what does that mean? What does that mean for Europe, for our position? You know, I think nobody can say it right now, but I think the situation will change in how we perceive ourselves also and how we are intervening now. Till now we have said no boots on the ground. I don't think that will change. But But if you're talking about a peace truce, yeah, then you have to talk about again if that's something, that's going to be the next step. What would that look like? I have right now, of course, no idea. That's also up to Ukraine. And I think, what we see in Europe right now when it comes to the Middle East, to Ukraine, if we are not going to take control of our own destiny and what we are trying to do, then Trump will decide.
And we is, in this case,
Europe.
Yeah.
Yes, and the European leaders they are responsible right now to make sure that they are 2 steps ahead. And we mentioned that earlier in this conversation, Louis mentioned it, that we were depending way too much for our security on the US. For the past few years, we try to invest ourselves. We are coming up to the 2% GDP. Mark Rutte mentioned that's not going to be sufficient. We have to look further than that, and I agree with him on that part.
You do,
Yeah, I need to know. No, that's also what our Minister of Defense, Ruben Brekelmans, said last week. You have to think ahead, and you cannot rely anymore. You have to rely on your allies, but that's something else than depending on them and thinking you will take care of it and we'll see what happens. And that was our attitude as Europe, I think, for way too long. And for the past few years, we are stepping up, but we are not there yet. So we have to move faster.
You said something very important, among other things, but I'm taking out one thing. You're saying, I don't think boots on the ground will change now, but if you have a peace agreement, that would have a new situation, and there it's thinkable.
I'm not sure if it's thinkable, but then you have to redesign again. Then you have to look at the situation at that point.
So there's a new moment where you need to decide how far your commitment goes.
Yes, and what that would look like, and that will all depend on what Ukraine sees as a next step also. You cannot force that.
You cannot force them to have boots on the ground, our boots on their ground, if they don't want to. No.
And I don't think you should have the boots on the ground for warfare, but if there's going to be some kind of peace for a certain period of time, they have to look again, what does it mean for the people also living there right now? But this is one theory, one scenario amongst, I don't know how many, so this is just one of them.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. But it's, there's a new situation.
If there's going to be a new reality, then you should look at it again. What does that reality mean? And what's the best way to design that, redesign that? And
in your opinion, Ukraine being... like Mrs. Orobets said, being part of the NATO, would that if you're saying let's leave it up to the Ukrainians what they decide that what prevailing would mean, and if for them it would be permanent security within the NATO, you would agree?
Well, I think we are taking those steps also ahead. So you need to have that conversation, and we are having it also together. So I think that's part of the movement we are in right now, actually.
Yes, please.
Can I just add one warning?
Warning, you say?
Warning, yeah. Yep. In the early 90s, one of the American presidents was stupid enough to impose the idea that no country with the territorial issues could enter NATO. You know what it led to? Moldova being seized of its territory, Georgia, who was heading towards NATO, and now Ukraine having territorial issues. However, another American president also made a very wise announcement saying that, okay, with territorial issues, you can be there. So the warning I want to impose that God forbid any European or American leader would come up and say, we will take Ukraine in NATO after the war. Because those 3 words would cost not just my generation, but the generation of my grandchildren to live in war. Because you remember the numbers of missile and drone production skyrocketing. Russians do not have to do something on the front line. They just have to continue bombing us as much as they would love to keep the war going on. So please, this is my warning. Just those 3 words shouldn't appear in any public conversation at all.
After the war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because Russian can organize the war as long as they want to, unfortunately.
And would you go as far as saying that, because it makes, on first sight, it makes sense, of course, to say no country with territorial issues or is within a war or something should be able to join the NATO. Would you go as far as saying that sort of that was an invitation to Putin to actually make war and seize territories of countries around him in order not to have them enter the NATO?
Let me put that to wider perspective. You are trying to play the game with a country that doesn't play by rules. So they would use your infrastructure, your finances, your system, your talents and your technology to outplay you, and the weak points of your democracy as well as your rules, because they don't have rules. They would outplay you at your own rules. So yes, that's the risk. So if the NATO is just the idea about holding up the rules, that's one thing. If NATO is actually about the countries who are brave and well prepared and organized enough so that no one would attack, that's not me. That's another
the
thing.
Chinese involving in the...
Yeah, that's... We're coming to China. Yeah.
So no, I don't believe that NATO would be weaker with Ukraine in it. Actually, we're the only country that has a very well-prepared army to stand up to the task. And when, on the beginning of war, we were grateful to accept education from other armies to give education to our soldiers. Right now, we are eager to teach your soldiers and officers, as I mentioned before.
So it would actually strengthen.
Exactly. We wouldn't be a weak member. We have a lot to put at the table. Definitely, we know that no country in Europe is willing to fight for us. Actually, we do not have allies, because by definition, ally is the country that is willing to fight for you. Unlike Russia, Russia actually has allies, because North Koreans are already on the battlefield. And there are some developments, last but not least, but I should mention that, there are some recent developments which were overseen by global politics. 2 countries recently became nuclear. Can you name them? Correct. North Korea and Belarus. Yay. Wow. Yeah? And Ukraine was the only country in the world that gave up its nuclear power in exchange for signed paper. So, if Ukraine loses, that would give a very good signal to every middle-sized country that it has to have a nuclear weapons. And there are many countries, my colleagues would add to that list, that are already half year to year in their nuclear program. So sooner or later, if Ukraine fails, you would have a new geopolitical map. This is the reality that would proceed, and this is something that would shift your lives more than any other's lives as well.
Proliferation of more and more nuclear weapons.
Yes,
that's a real danger, of course. Yes.
That's the case.
Louis Vassy, what would it mean to have Ukraine prevail? What would that mean in the next years, according to you and France, maybe?
So if you allow me a few comments, now that I'm a university president, I can become more theoretical, which is great, than when I used to be a practitioner. Like Dilan, I think it's really for the Ukrainians to define success, and that our collective role is to support them. And I'm really interested in what has been said about NATO membership and territory. Also because I think from a theoretical standpoint, it really makes strongly the case that you should never take any of these cards off the table when you discuss with the Russians at some point if we get there.
These cards, you mean like boots on the ground or not? Or
like boots on the ground, like NATO membership and these issues that make it more complicated for the Russians also to calculate on the exact end game. As you know, we've been pretty forceful on support for this scenario of Ukraine NATO membership, and with some resistance from other corners of the alliance. But I think it's important to help Ukraine get to the moment where hopefully there would be a negotiation with the best possible hand. Then from a theoretical standpoint, I would also be very wary of the truce scenario because I think it has few benefits and huge costs. Because
truce, like we freeze the...
Truth, like you freeze the lines.
Yeah,
because it doesn't really solve anything and really keeps you in a kind of permanent conflict situation, and hence brings about all the costs of the conflict and really very little benefits maybe on the short run a little bit, but not so much on the long run. And then the third theoretical point I would make, to go back to your to the NATO Secretary General's remark on preparing the war, and again I think they are very valid remarks, but also you need to prepare for all other ways of conflictuality that we are seeing right now, and they were underlined just before. Many things are really done under the threshold, whether it be cyber or disinformation or internal destabilization or the use of energy as a destabilizing element, let's say. And we need to embrace that, to also understand that there are non-defense issues that need to be addressed, and that's, I think, where the European Union, specifically for Europeans, plays a major role, because it's where all civilian and hopefully some military issues will be led from, and we really cannot avail or let ourselves discard all these aspects. On the other hand, autocrats are also faced with the same challenges. The only thing is that, of course, there are much less transparent systems, so they are doing well up to the point where they collapse, let's say, and that's what's happened with Bashar al-Assad just a few days ago. So we need to accept also that they too have non-military issues to deal with, specifically economics and the state of their social consensus, etc. Not to say that there is a scenario of collapse for tomorrow morning, but in Russia. But of course, these leaders know certainly a little bit more than we do about the exact state of their country, and I'm pretty sure they are pretty wary of that reality and the needs that they have in there, which means that we also have non-military tools that we need to also use, as they do with us in a way, and so I would argue that we also need to be focused on these issues, as well as what we do on the military assistance and the other things that we need to bring to the table, really to maximize Ukraine's hand, knowing that in the end it's for the Ukrainians to decide which are the issues that are essential for them in the future. And I get the point that overall long-term security guarantees is obviously an important issue for Ukraine.
But you're pointing out, among other things, that the civil and disinformation and energy part of what we would call a peace treaty or something, we should also be concentrating on all those other aspects, not only on the military aspect.
I don't really think we can compromise on these ones, because most of the time they are very difficult to attribute. Yeah. Also, you're never completely sure whom is responsible, or the burden of the proof is too heavy. I'm just saying we should know that conflictuality is not only about like outright war and this over other place. And I'm not even sure we should. There is this tendency of talking about war of information, cyber war, cognitive war, even now. I don't really like these terms, because they imply that there is a military response to these issues. In fact, not really. There is a civilian response to them, and a resilience and a societal response to these challenges. So I'm not too much in the business of putting the term war everywhere. Of course, it's an important subject, and from a military standpoint, and it's obviously central to the way we need to look at our strategic situation. I was simply underlining that even when there are ways of affecting your security that are not outright conflict, as Ukraine has seen all over the years, and other European countries, including France, when it comes to the disinformation side in Western Africa or in other places.
You mentioned China, and you also said that that using and you said, you know, the Putin has allies because the North Koreans are actually fighting there. You said, well, it might be a sign of weakness by the time you need, you know, a country like North Korea, which is one of the most backward countries in many ways, maybe not military, but on many other ways. You know, it might be a sign of weakness. But are we sure that we can actually have a peace with Putin, or are we looking at a war with behind that China? Because are we sure that the North Koreans are not just a sort of a method for China to test some of their sort of soldiers and military in battle against the West? Is it possible to make a peace with Putin, or should we talk to Xi?
Putin. First of all, there is a question of can you make peace with autocrats? I believe you can, though it's more difficult. When I was really younger, for some crazy reason, I wanted to write a piece on the fact that the theory of democratic peace wasn't really true, and that democracy theoretically could make wars one to the other. And I stopped because it's really very difficult to make that case. In generally speaking, it's very rare that democracies fight each other because their internal systems are more conducive to compromise and deliberation and finding ways out of a conflict. On the other hand, the system is, of course, very different in an autocratic system, and of course there is the fact that if you maintain yourself in power through violence, your propensity to use violence outside becomes much larger. There is a very good analysis of that in the memoirs of the French ambassador in the 30s in Germany, where he analyzes the link between violence outside and violence inside. At the same time, for survival reasons, it happens that autocracies make peace, and so theoretically it's possible. The point you raise is who defines survival? Certainly Putin himself, but of course he will also listen to people he's dependent from, so maybe the Chinese there can indeed have a role. This interaction Xi-Putin is not so linear as Xi telling Putin what he needs to do, I believe, so I don't know. At some point it will be, I guess, you bring autocracies to peace when really the cost for them of continuing war is so big and the risk for the internal stability of the system too big, and so you decide to move on and strike a deal.
Yeah, that's really that basically means that we might sign a peace, but that will hardly last. Do you think actually that we should be talking to the Chinese instead of to Putin eventually, or is that?
Well, I think we shouldn't be naive about the level of the interconnection between everything. So we shouldn't be naive on that part. But in the end, it is. And it's very difficult because when it comes to autocrats, when it comes, in this case, to Putin, I know that the history teaches us a lot, but it's still very difficult to understand what's going on in the psyche and the people around it, and you know how to intervene. But I think that at least the West, for me, if you ask me, if you look at the governments and Europe, I think we're just trying to learn how to handle also China, because we are so depending on them. And at the same time, and the truth is, we're going to need them probably forever, at least for a huge amount of time, for a long time ahead. So, and at the same time, we have to protect our own the countries, our knowledge, our infrastructure. So that's a very difficult situation we're in, and we're trying to figure it out, I think, as member states right now and as Europe as a whole. So at least don't be naive, at least have a strategy, and this is, I know it's a depressing answer with not a yes or no, but it's very difficult, yeah.
Lesia Orobets, maybe closing off, and then I'm looking to the audience whether there might be any questions in the audience. But you said that in a way, and actually that's what I gathered from reading about it, the reopening of the Notre Dame, Zelensky spoke to Trump, which to me, from afar, looked at least like a sort of a little bit of a success, because they've been talking and they came both out saying that, you know, they had a good talk. At least that's something. Might be even a little bit surprising to see that, but would you say that you're a little bit more optimistic that now that's Trump there, that, you know, there might be an end to the conflict, because for some reason the Biden administration have just, you know, moved in enough weapons to not lose, but also certainly not to win? How do you look upon sort of the next half a year, the possibilities or the chances for Ukraine?
I mean, there's not much good about burning out of Notre Dame. Probably the only good thing that actually happened because of that was that meeting, thanks to Macron and his allies. So thank you for that. Am I optimistic? I mean, if I say that Ukrainians are lucky, would you believe me? But we are extremely lucky. Here in the audience is my colleague. We both stood up to our last revolution of dignity in 2014. Yeah. So then autocracies had technologies developed enough to send SMSs to our phones to everyone who was in the area of a protest, threatening us with criminal responsibility. Somehow they even managed to send some virus to my phone. I was in the middle of that, one of the leaders of the revolution. So I woke up not having a single name on my phone. So all numbers were unknown. But they didn't have the technology that they then used in Hong Kong and in Belarus, where they could physically track everyone who participated in revolution. It's not that Belarusians were not fighting good enough. Like exactly 50% of their country stood up against Lukashenko, but they failed because of those IT technologies being used against free people. So yes, I'm optimistic. You know, somehow Ukrainians are much more luckier than other countries. But getting back to the question whether the Biden administration was doing enough, no. He was badly advised by his advisors that actually closing the Ukrainian sky would be the act of escalation and the act of war. And no matter how hard we persuaded them that no Russian would suffer if we shoot down their missiles, unfortunately, it never happened. So I do hope that with Trump's help, or at least with him withholding and saying that this is a European case, we would finally manage to close the European sky, because otherwise we would see this, not just civic casualties and Ukraine being called hostage, but also the level of support, like after every attack, the percentage of people who would, you know, who are that desperate for that war to end on any terms, that number would grow sooner or later. You know, this is the price, this is the death toll that we pay. So yes, I'm optimistic. With Trump's help or without it, I'm sure that we will find our way out, as long as we know the tricks of our enemies and manage to sustain. And stay united, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Amazing that the optimism has to come from the ex-parliamentarian from Kiev. Thank you very much for that. I'm looking at the audience because, as we always do, there's at the Balie, we invite you to ask a question or make a short remark, or is there anybody who I could come to? I see a gentleman over there, and I see another gentleman over there.
First, thanks for the excellent debate for the panelists. A question to all of you, but just not been said, that we don't want to be too dependent for the security of the Americans, and also what just not been said that several countries have nuclear weapons, including Belarus, to Russia. Should other European countries than the existing nuclear powers like the Netherlands and perhaps also Ukraine, despite of the NPT, pursue to have their own nuclear defense capabilities?
Despite of the non-proliferation, difficult word, treaties, yeah. Any one of you three wanting to comment, and I'm coming to you afterwards.
Should the Netherlands become a nuclear power? That's for
Yes,
you.
of course. No.
like Belarus? Huh?
Yeah. Well, I think that the movement and the solution, but the logical movement would be rather to work even more together with our partners, as I mentioned, on all levels actually, than to think that as a member state, as a small country such as the Netherlands, you should build it up all by yourself. I don't think that would be the most wise decision and the movement to go. So yes, we definitely, and that was not the question, but I totally agree with the movement we are in right now to invest in our defense, to make sure that we invest in the industry, in our people. But let's work together with our allies who have those powers rather than think that you should have everything on your own, because I don't think we can accomplish that. And that wouldn't be the best movement also for the world order, probably.
Can I add a quick comment?
Please.
You know, when we advanced in Kursk Oblast, that was the first time in history a non-nuclear country invaded a nuclear country. So everyone would predict that the hell would open. But you know what? It's been almost 6 months since we did it, and nothing happened. So my point is that nuclear weapons is the weapon of not an attack weapon, but a weapon that would strain your enemies from doing something weird. But you can do a lot of things with conventional weapons. And as my colleague Dilan just mentioned, you have to know what your strength is in, and you have to elaborate that to that extent that other countries would be willing to trade with you on that kind of a militech. So, for example, Ukrainian militech, I wouldn't believe that 3 years ago, but right now is one of the best in the world, because we can elaborate the new engineering decision in 2 weeks, while it would take any other country, any other company in the world 6 months to come up with that update. Not just because we are that smart or something, but because the war pushes us so that the technology actually changes every 2 weeks. So the weapons that didn't participate in this war cannot be considered modern weapons. So that is it. So you have to know what your strength is, and sometimes it's not nuke, it could be the conventional weapons, but you actually have to have people who are willing to fight for what's right for you.
Hi, good evening, thank you. My question was in particular about Trump. You spoke about the Trump administration, all three of you. You spoke about, Louis, less reliance on the United States on the part of Europeans, that needs to be undertaken. But what I'm missing here is how can we trust the judgment of a man who praises autocrats and has that sort of history behind him? How can we trust that judgment when we're trying to negotiate a peace?
Good question. With autocrats, you mean? Yeah. Good question, yeah. Maybe more for psychologists, though, but it's a good question.
Generally speaking, states tend to operate on the basis of their own national interests, and I think the whole argument of Trump when he's been looking into these issues, including the relationship to the European Union, has been, I will harshly defend the national interests of the United States. When I say we need not to be too dependent, it's because we need to be able to have an impact on the way these interests are in fact defined or apprehended by all of our partners, including those that we hope will remain our allies. And so that means being strong enough, again, all over the board, to have an interaction in which you can positively interact, let's say, in this discussion where the Americans and the Trump administration will have to decide which course to take. If you are too dependent, of course, you won't be taken too much into account, and your interests won't be factored in, let's say, the overall rezoning by the administration. But yeah, I tend to think that beyond the person, there is a country. That country as a place in the world to defend, is very much focused also on the Chinese challenge, and so there will be ways to have that discussion. But you might want to enter the discussion with a strong hand, obviously.
Okay, good evening, and thank you for the dialogue, and thank you to Ukraine for the extraordinary lesson in resilience. But I want to ask, are we really doing enough actually to help Ukraine? Because the Lithuanian foreign minister has recently said that Europe's strategy for Ukraine has failed, also specifically on NATO and burden sharing. Donald Tusk has said that we cannot intermediate our defense as Europe. Poland is at 4% of its GDP, so exceeding NATO's target, and we barely at 2%. So what are we doing on this, for NATO and burden sharing? Are we really going? I know at the moment France does not have its budget yet, but are we trying to go beyond?
Well, maybe as being from the Dutch point of view, yeah, for the past years we got to the 2% recent, and I think that is crucial. But our Minister of Defense, Ruben Brekelmans, but also of course Mark Rutte said earlier, we will probably need more. And if you look at, I believe that Ukraine right now is spending 25% GDP, which means that's the price of peace or warfare. It's huge. Russia is spending, I believe, around 7 or 8%. And I think that from the member states, but let's just focus on the Netherlands, we probably will need more. And our defense system, and we know that, if we would go to 3-4%, if we could, and if we would go tomorrow, then we wouldn't be able to put that money away, because we need to invest, we need to build it up, we need more people. And I'm very happy, I'm very proud that the organization of, the defense department, the military, is also interesting for young people in the Netherlands. I'm very proud to see that. But we need to invest on all those levels to make sure that that 3 or 4% or the 2% even has true meaning. So we are in the middle of that right now. And I think that every European country at least, but of course NATO, but every European country is looking at it right now also. Where do we need to invest more? And that's one of the lessons and the urgencies we see from the past years, but also the push we feel if you look at what's happening in the US. And I don't think that's a bad thing, that Europe and the countries are looking at themselves, and we need to be able to protect ourselves together with our friends, together with our allies. You do it always together, but I hope that we will never go back to the point that we depend on others, that they will protect us. And that was our, I think, attitude for a long time, at least as the Netherlands. So I'm happy to see that we are getting there, and probably 2% wouldn't be enough then. But we just made it, and now we have to make sure that we invest it in a good manner so that it has true meaning, the 2%.
Lesia?
Could I also add to that? As such security threats would put each and every European politician in a very, very hard point. Because every elections, you would have to persuade your public that it is much better to invest in security rather than in social security. And unlike Russia, where there were no free elections for already 5 years, you would have to do the right things, not the things that get you re-elected. That's the other problem. But my point is that you don't have just to spend more, you have to spend wiser. So at the beginning of the war, we were begging for any munition that you can send our way. But we are already past that point, and there are not many munitions in Europe left that you can share without imposing your security to the threat. But this is so-called Danish model. However, the government of Netherlands also participated, where they would order some military armament to Ukrainian military companies, paying for that, having no logistical problems. That would be a direct account and direct purchase, and then delivering that to the front line. And it worked beautifully, because we know the best how to do the lean production, because we never had enough money to produce something expensive. Yeah, and last but not least, the good news is that you do not have to spend money on that, not a single cent. Why? Because there are 300 billion of frozen assets of Russia in the EU. 3,000 billion. That's a cost of for Russia of 2 to 3 years of war. Definitely they are desperate to get those money back to restore their economy. But if any country of the EU would come up with a precedent and adopt a law allowing Ukraine to use those funds, or at least the interest of those funds, to protect itself, that would make a huge difference, and you wouldn't have to pay a penny or a cent for that, but actually make Russia pay, which is a good solution for that matter, as you would ask me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think we have room for one last question over here, and
thank you for everything, and especially thank you, Lesia Orobets, for being here and speaking. I really admire the way the Ukrainians have stood up, and nobody expected them to still be here in the fight. Because when the Russians invaded, we thought it would be a matter of days, and you're still there fighting, and that's incredible. But although I feel that way, I'm also a little bit. My question is a little bit of the devil's advocate, is because of also what Vassy has said about we have been so optimistic in the 90s, thinking end of history, liberalism would prevail if we would trade with countries like Russia and China, they would become democratic, and we saw that it didn't work, and yeah, there is a reaction came very soon in the 90s. With Huntington stating clash of civilizations. And this seems to be the way Russia and China perceive the West in terms of Huntington, saying that what's universalism to the West is considered imperialism for the rest. So the rest sees us as being a threat for their non-liberal view of life. And wouldn't it be, from a strategic perspective, more wise to try to separate our enemies instead of uniting them and saying that the West is not a threat to these countries, and maybe also strive for peaceful coexistence instead of victory of Western values?
That's a
tough last question.
Sorry.
Any volunteer?
Can I try just a couple of
Louis
words?
Vassy can
Because
certainly try. As the new
I will
president of
try.
Strasbourg.
I will just try because it so happens that in the program I had to run as a university president for Sciences Po. One of the aspects I underlined was it's a university specialized in political sciences, international relations, social sciences, humanities, and I underlined there the relationship there is in fact between social sciences and democracy. Obviously, you cannot have a critical approach to social, political, or international issues if you don't have if you are not in a kind of democratic governance system where people will in fact tell you to follow the line of the party. Why do I say that? Because one of the aspects there is indeed that I absolutely think that concepts matter, and we should not accept to be put ourselves in a situation where it's the West versus the rest. First of all, I would argue that the West is pretty diverse in a way, and certainly France has its very strong peculiarities when it comes to the way we look at issues pertaining to freedom of speech, freedom of religion. I mean, of course, the whole concept of secularism and laïcité in France are very specific. So we all have our peculiarities. Second, I don't think there is a kind of unified West at all, if only because there are like major players that are really which different interests are very much disaligned. And among them, there are countries that are very much democratic, maybe not perfectly democratic, but are we? I mean, it's a big debate that we could have. I would certainly not put China and India in the same category at all, by all means, and certainly not Japan or Singapore or many countries in the African continent that remain democratic. So I think it would be really a mistake to simply even accept the fact that the debate is framed that way. We need to maintain our freedom of maneuver when it comes to diplomatic interactions with these countries that are very much diverse and sometimes even rivals in a way. So, indeed, no acceptance on our side that these concepts of West and rest are valid at all. I simply don't think it's true.
Could I add?
You have the last word, yes, please. And then we close up.
Autocracies are already divided. They all follow their own interests. If that was not the truth, Assad's regime in Syria wouldn't fall that quickly, because either China or mostly Russia would step in, but they didn't. Military effort was already overstretched, so they're on the brink of losing what was valuable to them, the Mediterranean ports. It is the clash of civilizations, and the more we observe the situation, the bigger are the differences in values. And whether China enjoys buying cheap Russian oil, yes. But whether they are eager to put their companies in danger of secondary sanctions, no. Is China willing to sell at any price what it takes to assemble drones to Russia? Yes, and China is very much used to launder all those details I showed you previously, because usually Russia would get those details from Western countries through China. But is China eager to refinance the Russian debt, the war debt? I strongly doubt. You know, it takes a huge courage to send your men to war. And I know what I'm talking about because my husband is on the front line and my brother is on the front line. But somehow Russians managed to find 30,000 people every month willing to participate in this bloody war. Most of the times it happens that some dysfunctional family decides that sending her member of the family to a mortal danger is a good way to pay out the debts or become richer. So I do not know how many dysfunctional families there are in Russia, but it looks like they're pretty pretty much. I would pay all money of the world for the security of my husband. I mean it. But I still send him to the front line because we both believe that there's something more valuable than life. It's freedom, and this is the lesson we've learned. Thank you.
I think that's a very good moment to close this evening off. I like to thank all three of you. I'd like to thank the audience. I'd like to thank you for participating in this conversation and agreeing that we had no questions before sent to you. This is sort of a moment where you can think, but it's out in public. So I really appreciate it that you are willing to do that on these very, very important topics for our society, for Ukraine. I would say for everybody in Europe. So your willingness is greatly appreciated. I know that being the leader of your party in Parliament has other very important issues, but you're willing to come here and think out freely is really exceptional. Same for you too, as the new president of Sciences Po, a new job where you have many other things to do than just think out loud about these issues. So it's really appreciated, and I cannot even start thanking you for for speaking here so clearly whilst your husband is at war, whilst your country is in danger. Being able to get these issues across in such a concise and amazing manner is just, I think, beyond what's what we could possibly ask of you in times of war. And so it's really appreciated that you do this, and amazingly mental effort too. We know that, so we're really grateful for that. We know that you're a very courageous person. You participated in the Maidan revolutions, with a big, which was very, very dangerous. We do know, but we saw it here tonight as well, and that's really, really appreciated. And I do hope that there will be solutions. I personally can't fathom the idea that we didn't close the skies over Ukraine. I can't understand why we don't. We can, we don't. I think it's a shame. I think it's a shame to be a Dutch tax-paying voter and seeing what's happening to Ukraine. But that's my personal opinion, not my opinion as a leader of the conversation. But I think that. We cannot stress enough, and we cannot start enough to understand what's happening there on a personal level as well. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. Hope to see you again.